Let's talk about how you got into ski racing. Your sister Jamie went to Utah,
Mm.
but was this a family affair? How did you get into this kind of niche sport?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story, but growing up, I grew up in Dixon, California, which is like in between Sacramento and San Francisco, kind of farmland. And we had a cabin up at Donner Lake in Truckee, California. And my parents and grandparents were all big skiers, weekend skiers, recreational skiers. Back then, there was this thing called club racing where you could just go and honestly, it was mainly, I think, just drinking, but it was just like a social ski race, and my parents loved it. So I started skiing when I was 2, and then when I was 5, we went in this program at Squaw Valley, now called Palisades Tahoe, called the Mighty Mites, and you just basically ski around with a ski coach all day, and it's kind of the lead, like kind of guides you into either being a racer or mogul skier or big mountain skier, kind of whatever you want to do with it. And both my sister chose the racing route. I don't know how much influence my parents had on that decision, but and then I always looked up to her, so I obviously followed in her footsteps. And we kind of got into racing, and then that brought us to Utah, where the school was more set up. My mom was concerned about school and wanted to make sure I was still getting a good education, so we ended up in Utah, where they have ski specific schools. And both my sister and I went through high school in Utah, and then we both decided to stay and both skied for University of Utah.
Did your family move to Utah for Jamie?
Yeah,
Wow.
pretty much. My mom, we owned a Ford dealership in Dixon, and my mom wanted a better school, and then the ski program in Park City was really good, and so I think it was going to be temporary. And then my mom landed in Park City and told my dad she was never leaving. So my dad had the long-term plan of selling the dealership and getting out here. It took him a few years of commuting back and forth, but now both my parents live in Park City, and my sister and I live in Salt Lake. So yeah, the initial move was for my sister to make sure she was getting as good enough school and still had access to skiing. So it was a big family commitment, that's for sure.
What kind of person is drawn to speed skiing versus moguls?
Oh, I don't know what I can say without offending mogul skiers or freestyle skiers. They're all adrenaline sports in their own way. I honestly think you move to whatever your friends are doing at a young age. All my friends were racers, and so you kind of, like any sport, right? Like if all your friends are soccer players, you end up being a soccer player. If all your friends, and then it kind of gets to where if you're kind of an outlier in terms of how good you are, I think that also can influence your decision later in life. Like I tried to play sports as long as I could. But I was drawn to skiing because I kind of had a natural knack. I was naturally, I guess, more talented at it than I was at baseball or any other sport. But also, I mean, there's the adrenaline factor, right? Like there's not many sports that give you the adrenaline factor that ski racing gives you. But I won't say that mogul skiing doesn't have adrenaline and whatnot. I just never really had access to just being a mogul skier and never really got into that. But to each their own, I would say.
So your stats go back to 2009. What were you doing in the 2008, 2009, 2010 as you were kind of breaking onto the international stage?
So the way ski racing works is there's USSA races, which are all US sanctioned governing body, and then you get into the FIS, which is the International Ski Federation. I don't know how the numbers got or the letters got mixed around to make FIS, but I think it's because it's Italian or something. But yeah, so when I want to say 17, you become FIS eligible, and then your stats are basically rated against everyone in the world. And then you start racing FIS races, and that's kind of the highest level. Like World Cup races are FIS races. It's just the highest level FIS race. So until then, it was just an age thing. And then I made the US team after the 2012 season. So 2012, 2013 season, I made the national team. And that was kind of when I started racing more international races.
And then 2013, you had been 6 years on the Park City ski team. How did they find you? Was that just naturally in your neighborhood?
So actually they were really a high-end program then, and they actually recruited my sister. And the deal was they had to take me as well if they got my sister. So I kind of rode the coattails of that one. And I guess I proved my worth in the end, but I guess I would say the head coach at the time recruited my sister, and I tagged along, and that's how that worked out. They were a really strong program at the time, probably the best in the country. And obviously that shifted in different ways over the years, but that's how I ended up Park City.
How much older is your sister?
3 years.
Okay. So after you spent the time on the Park City ski team, you were named to the US World Junior Alpine Championship team.
Mm-hmm.
What did that do for your career?
So that was my breakout season. So I went to the national team tryout camp in Mount Bachelor, and I was kind of the underdog, knowing my rankings weren't very good, but they saw me ski and they thought I was a decent skier, so they invited me. I kind of knew I wasn't going to make it that year. This would have been before I made World Juniors. So I was still skiing on the Park City ski team the next year. So I didn't make the national team that year. But then I had kind of my breakout season. It's called the NORAM Cup. If you, as an analogy for baseball, it would be, I guess, AA baseball. So you have the major leagues, which is World Cup, Europa Cup is AAA, and NORAMs are kind of AA. And NORAM Cups, I mean, anyone can race them any age. And as a pretty young athlete, I started breaking into the top 15, top 10. So that qualified me for the World Juniors. And basically the US team took me on as what's called an invitee that year. So you get to travel and race with them, but you're paying your way. And you're still kind of an outsider, but they give you a cool jacket and tell you can come to some camps. And that was definitely my breakout year. I went to Europe. I raced a few Europa Cups, which for my age, I was by far the youngest and the smallest. And it was very eye-opening to me to see European ski racing. It's a different level, and they do it very differently. And but I did pretty well. And then World Juniors, I actually did really well for my age because I was young that year. And then that was kind of my gateway onto the national team, was getting invited to World Juniors and then doing decent. And then the next year there was kind of no question that I actually jumped the D team. So the US ski team has A, B, C, and D. I jumped the D team and went straight to the C team.
And then what was the biggest difference between skiing in the US versus Italy and Switzerland?
One, the mountains are bigger. Two, there's a lot of fans. It's a much more popular sport. And then I would say three is how many people. So in the US, there's probably 25 guys that are my level at that age, right? There's 25 guys that could win a race there. In Europe, there's 300 of them. So you're not any slower than anybody else, right? It's not all these people that are way better than you. There's just more people that are just as good as you. So the races are much more competitive. Can't really think of a good analogy. It's kind of a hard sport to explain to a lot of people, but it's just like, if in the US it's a Formula One race with 8 guys, then in Europe it's like a Formula One race with 50 guys. So it's just very hard. A great day is a great day, but it's very hard to kind of stay in there, I guess.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
I also read an article of yours, I think it was on usskiing.com, where you had talked about college sports as a stress release from international competition. When you got to Utah and you were competing simultaneously with everything that you were doing on the world stage, how did those kind of mentalities differ?
I would say it's a stress release from actual trying to get onto the World Cup. When your life is only ski racing, you basically break down with anxiety of oh, I didn't do well today, I have to do well tomorrow, because all you have in life is ski racing. And we literally have 1 minute ski runs to beat 100 other people, and one mistake is a horrible day. If you do one bad turn, you're gonna, you don't stand a chance. So it's this really small amount of time to have a perfect performance. And we spend so much time making sure we're ready, and so much time worried about it, and so much time preparing for it. And it's just, when it doesn't come together, and it cannot come together for an entire season. Like you guys have a bad season just based off luck or based off, not being in the right mental space. And it wore me down. I got kind of thrown into upper level skiing faster than if I were to do it again, I would have stayed at the NORAM longer before I went to the Europa Cup. Just to, settle in, build my confidence and be in the right mental headspace, as opposed to just being like, oh, you did great in this one race, we'll move you up to the next level. And then I just went and got my ass kicked. Like, I mean, I was having good runs and getting 78th place. And I was just like, what, it was demoralizing in it. And took a lot of wind out of my sails. And what college did for me is I got to college, and it's the way college ski racing set up is more of a team event. If you do well, you help the team. If you don't do well, the team helps you. And I had a social life. I was advancing, my education, and I had all these things that were going for me. So if I had a bad day skiing, I could go, and study and feel like I got something out of my day. Whereas if you're just racing and you have a bad day, you're like, oh, this day was ruined, So I found, I guess, myself in college. I found myself much more at ease mentally with my performance, and my first year in college was my best year of ski racing ever. And I attribute all that to like still having the intensity of wanting to be a World Cup skier, but also having the releases of a social life and advancing in other aspects of my life.
Do you find that thought process is echoed through those who have gone the same way that you did and did college simultaneously?
Yeah, so there's actually a ton of Canadians go through college. And the reason I think it works really well for the Canadians is the Canadian program doesn't necessarily write the athlete off when they go to college. So it'll be a World Cup athlete, and I can name a bunch, but they're a World Cup athlete, but they're like, I want an education, so I'm going to race as many World Cups as I can while I'm in college. That only works at a few schools, the way schools are set up. So you have to go to a school that has a quarter system like Dartmouth or Denver University. So that has been a challenge. University of Utah is starting to do it, where they're just working really hard to, recruit these athletes and tell them that they can make it work, and having professors make it work. And, it's tough traveling that much and missing that much school, and not, you don't really get the social life. So it's kind of a different way of going about it as opposed to what I did. I basically kind of ran dry on the US team, got kicked off. I mean, I didn't make the criteria to be on the US team anymore. So I went to college it was what I wanted to do, but it was also, I didn't really have any other options. And so I won't sit here and say that I walked away from the ski team, but I would say that a lot of athletes now are starting to look at college as more of a jump. The one thing I will say is that college shows you a lot of other things in life, and it changes a lot of athletes' passions. They think that, all they do in life is ski racing, and that their purpose is ski racing, and they get to college, and take a astronomy course, and they're like, well, actually, I want to be an astrophysicist, or, and on the darker side, there's athletes that go to college and get stuck in the social scene and kind of lose the motivation to be that high level of an athlete, and you kind of watch them fall. So there's kind of the two sides of it. I only skied for Utah for 2 years because I didn't have eligibility, and that was kind of a blessing in disguise. While I wish I had 4 years, but I had 2 years. I came in, I found, like I said, that stress release, but still had the fire and the passion to get back to the World Cup. So I kind of did it as how I would say best I possibly could. But I could see it being challenging for other athletes trying to do kind of what I did.
So in 2017, when you became an All-American, how old were you?
Ooh, 24, I believe 23 or 23. It was 24 this second year, I think. Yeah, I think I turned 23 in November.
Were your teammates on the same path that you were?
There were a couple, yes.
Were they younger? Were you on the older side where you had competed and then went to college?
I was definitely on the older side. College skiers notoriously are pretty old because we take gap years in between college, or in between high school and college. but I was basically a junior, senior age as a freshman, sophomore, so, but there were other athletes. I mean, my best friend, Dominic Demshar, was racing in the Olympics for Australia. Ronnie Remy's on the World Cup tour. She was my teammate. Abby Gent had raced World Cups. She was on my team. I'm sure I'm missing some, but everyone was like a very high level skiing. Like college skiing is extremely competitive. It is some of the best skiers in the world, whether they're, been on the World Cup scene and got pushed down or pushing up to the World Cup scene. It's kind of, it's very competitive. So which makes it really cool and unique.
Where else were you being recruited?
Oh, I didn't really get recruited. So my first year, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I got kicked off the team in May and had to apply to schools. I was late to apply to schools, and everyone had given up scholarships. I had a few offers. I think Montana State, Alaska. I don't think I'd gotten into DU, but I hadn't really talked to the coach and hadn't really talked to the coach at CU. I was really thinking about Montana. But I was pretty low on money because professional skiers don't make very much money. And I lived in Utah, and the in-state in Utah was like $7,000. And the US Ski Team has grants for alumni at the time, because that was released. I got $5,000 a year for alumni towards tuition. So I was like, oh, I'll just go to Utah and pay $2,000. And then I got a full scholarship my second year. So Utah was just the cheapest option. And yeah, I was just pretty late to the party on getting recruited.
And then did you find that being so close to home helped that transition? I mean, you were what, 40 minutes away from your house?
Yeah, I think it helped kind of like with the comfort. One big thing with University of Utah is we're really close to our training venues. CU has to drive 45 minutes. DU has to drive 45 minutes. Montana has to drive pretty far. Like Utah's 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. And then, yeah, I guess the familiarity kind of helped me, I guess, transition smoothly towards being comfortable at school. And I was also pretty old, so I guess the maturity helped me, right? I was 22 years old. I wasn't some 18-year-old first time leaving the house. So it really wasn't a hard transition for me. I traveled the world, and the hard thing I would say is like balancing, I mean, you know what it's like balancing schoolwork and fun and sport was what I struggled with the most my first year. I kind of ran myself to the ground trying to do all of it. And then I learned my lesson and grew up in 1 year.
In that same US skiing article, you said that college gave you some time to, quote, mature.
Mm-hmm.
In what ways? What were you alluding to in that sentence?
One was physically. I've always been very small for a ski racer, especially the speed events like Super G and downhill. I've always been probably around 165 to 185 pounds. And I mean, the best downhill in the world is 230 pounds. And it's a gravity sport. And so I just get beat in sections just by science. So that was one big one. I got stronger, I got bigger. And then also just like growing up in the sense that like life isn't ski racing. Like ski racing's fun. Ski racing's, it's an entertainment. It's all sports are entertainment in the end, right? And it helped me take a step back and understand that like I was less intense about skiing and like less worried about it, I guess. So like that maturity of like there's so much more to life than sport. While sport's super fun and I intend to do it as long as I possibly can, it's not the end all be all. And so it kind of gave me the right perspective I needed to come back. And if I was good, then it's awesome. If I was bad, then whatever, we learn from it, we move on and we get better, as opposed to just being like, oh, my life's ruined because I didn't make the US Ski Team this year. That's just a fallacy we make up in our own heads that limit our abilities.
With the access to resources that the Utes provided you, you had trainers and you had sports psychologists and people who could help you make that transition smooth,
mm-hmm.
help that maturity grow quicker. What kind of resources did you take advantage of?
I used I used everything I could, even to like networking for future jobs. It's one thing college is especially being on a sports team. There's a lot of donors that are very passionate about the sport and they really want to talk to you, and just getting to know those guys because all those men and women have advanced through life to a point where they can donate to a team. It's like that's something I want to do in my future. But I mean, we had massage therapists, we had PTs. When I showed up, I fractured my back in 2013, and I'd really struggled with it until I went to school in 2016. And I worked nonstop. I mean, I had 10 different PTs opinions, and we got it figured by the season, and that really helped me. I could finally touch my toes again without severe pain. So that helped me have the best year of my career. We had a great sports psych that we did team meetings with, which was really cool. I really appreciated that. By the end of the season, it took a while everyone to warm up to it, but by the end of the season, we were all pretty into it. I mean, there were tons of resources, and I tried to use all of them, and that's kind of part of maturing, right? And now that I'm back with the team, I use every resource I possibly can. And I think that's something I wish I did at a younger age was, take more advantage of mental health professionals and sports psychologists and PTs. When you're a kid, you're like, oh, my back kind of hurts, but whatever, it'll be fine in the morning. But that stacks up on you. And I think being mature is, I guess, asking for help, because there's people that are trained in it that are better than you at dealing with that sort of stuff than yourself. So it's not gonna make it worse.
What were you talking about in those group sessions with the sports psych? Was it more performance or was it more clinical?
I would say performance. Sometimes college racing is really challenging in the sense that your team's counting on you. So you kind of carry more pressure. So we talked a lot about like how team dynamic, and if someone doesn't perform just because they started last and didn't perform because they had more pressure on them, it doesn't make it their fault. So we kind of talked through a lot of like team dynamics and performance. From what I can remember, it was a while ago. And I know a lot of people did individual stuff. I did as well. I can't really remember specifics. But yeah, a lot of it was team dynamic, just because it's really important to have a healthy team dynamic, especially in college, because everyone's stressed out, school and whatnot. And if you're not performing, I'm sure it's the same on team sports, right? Like if someone's not performing or something and you start to almost resent, like we just wanted to make sure we talk through that and make sure we're not resenting anyone that's not skiing great. Cause like they obviously want to ski great. It's not a choice to be in a slump. But helping each other pull each other out of those slumps is kind of what we were going for.
When the bumps and bruises start to rack up, what's going through your mind? Is that just what you sign up for when you choose an adrenaline sport like ski racing? Do you kind of just sign your name like, hey, I'm going to get injured at some point?
Yeah. There's a few guys that have made it through, and it's pretty interesting if you see people that have made it through with, relatively few injuries, how much success you can have just off of being consistent. And but I would say there's very few people that make it through a career without, at least doing an ACL or, separating a shoulder or something. So I would say yes, but I guess in a weird way, I thought I was going to make it through. And I think a lot of people would be like, oh, well, it won't happen to me. Even though it happens to every single person, you're always like, oh, it won't happen to me until it happens to you. And you're like, oh, well, damn it, it happened to me.
And we'll get to 2020.
Yeah.
So you get to college. You actually said in that article that college skiing, you thought, decreased your chance of getting to the Olympics and winning a medal. Do you stand by that? Because I read that and I thought that is such an interesting perspective.
Yeah, so you're kind of going down a rabbit hole here. The way it seems to work in the US is if you end up at college, the US team wants to get a hold of kids when they're about, 18, 19 and push them up through their system, their development system. And if someone decides to go to school, they kind of write them off in a way, not fully, but the college ski races aren't as challenging as international ski races. And they don't prepare you in the same way that international ski races prepare you for the World Cup. They're easier slopes, they're easier snow conditions, they're easier course sets. It's basically like racing NASCAR to Formula One, right? Like one's going in a circle and one's doing a bunch of turns. And that's kind of a weird analogy, but it there's pros and cons to every situation, right? And I had skied a lot of really challenging races in Europe. So I felt that I had that aspect developed in my skiing. Like I knew what to expect and I knew how to handle that sort of stuff. But what college teaches you is totally different, right? It teaches you how to be your own person. It teaches you how to, manage your time. It teaches you that life is about all sorts of things, not just ski racing. And but your pure development as a ski racing athlete stalls out a little bit. You don't progress as much purely as an athlete in college. And there's kind of no way to say that differently. I think if college teams improved, I think there could be a way, but it would take a lot of money and it would take a lot of time. But World Cup racing is so much more challenging that college doesn't physically prepare you for it. So that's what I was kind of getting to with that, is my development as an actual ski racing, purely athletic standpoint slowed down. But other aspects of my life accelerated, and I think that made me a more balanced athlete. So I would say, no, I don't stand by that anymore, but I don't think I would do it any differently if I had to again, but it created challenges of its own.
Yeah, for sure. So you see up in the corner, we have a countdown.
Yeah.
I already worked through that, but it will go to 0 if we get cut off. No biggie.
Sounds
I'll see
good.
you in a few seconds.
Okay, sounds good.
When you got back to the US ski team in 2020, you got to the B team. Things were, I would assume, feeling good. Had you leveled out that kind of wavelength of, am I going to stay on the team? Am I not going to stay on the team?
There's a lot in that timeline. So after college, I did an independent year with the coach, Cody Marshall, who was an ex-World Cup skier, and my friend Tanner Farrow, who skied for the University of Denver. And we did our entire year on our own, paying our way, like went to Chile, did a bunch of fundraising, had a great prep period, and then Tanner crashed and dislocated his collarbone. So he missed the entire beginning of the season. And then I started off really strong. I won a bunch of NORAMs right off the bat. And then we went over to Europe, and Tanner just had gotten healthy. And we went to this Europa Cup at this notorious race called Kitzbühel. It's the biggest race of the year, like 100,000 fans. And they do a Europa Cup before the World Cup. The World Cup is when no one's at the Europa Cup, but it's a very challenging hill. And I did pretty well in that race. And I asked the World Cup staff if I could race the World Cup coming up. And it was quite the debate. And in the end, they gave me a shot. And I scored my first World Cup points, which is a top 30 in World Cup, which, I mean, it doesn't sound great, but it was a big stepping stone in my career. So I got 29th in my first World Cup Super G at Kitzbühel. And I was only the third American that year to score in Super G, third or fourth. So basically that put me into like the fourth best Super G skier in the US at the time. And after that, there was one more World Cup race. I raced that. I was really fast in sections, but had one big mistake and ended up pretty far down the board. But I showed a lot of speed in that race. And so after that, those two races, I was like, oh man, like there's no way I'm not like I'm gonna make the team again. Sweet. And then that year they didn't name me, they named me as an invitee. So that was the end of 2019. So they said I could train with the team, but I had to pay my way, and if they had too many numbers, then I wouldn't get invited. So I got invited to half the camps before the season that year and had to pay my way, which was fine, but it wasn't exactly what I was hoping for, because there was kind of like last second, oh, you can't come to this one because we have too many people. And that proved more challenging almost than doing it on my own. Does that make sense? Because then I could just like have a plan and stick to it. I was kind of at their mercy. But then the season was great. Started off okay. And then I top 30'd in Val Gardena. I got 22nd in Val Gardena, which is my best result to date. And I was really proud of that one. And then after that season, I got named back to the B team officially and was fully supported. I can keep going with that story, but because what was the original question? I forgot the original question in the rant.
It was hoping that you would go on a rant about your 2020 year, and I got the answer.
Okay.
But then you're back at Val Gardena and you have this terrifying injury.
Yeah. So I guess I was off 1 year prior because I got hurt in 2020. You're right. Oh, but December 2020. Yeah. So I was off 1 year. So I did that whole year. When I scored at Val Gardena, I got 22nd. Then I skied the rest of that year. Then I got named to the team. And then COVID hit. So when COVID hit, I crashed at the end of 2019, in Hinterstoder, Austria, and I tore my LCL in my right knee. So I got sent home. It was non-surgical, so it wasn't a big deal. And I was like ready to ski by April, no worries.
April 2020.
Yeah, so right when COVID hit, the race before COVID hit, the rest of the season was canceled after that race. So I crashed, flew home before shit hit the fan, and then so COVID hit, and our camps got very challenging. I could not go to our first camp in Zermatt, Switzerland, because I dropped the bag off at my friend's house and then left, and he happened to test positive for COVID that day. And so it was at the beginning, so we didn't really have much data, but I got told that I couldn't get on a plane because I went into a house that a person that had COVID. So I missed our 14-day camp in Zermatt. And then that was our one camp because it was challenging to travel at the time. And then our next camp at Colorado, my serviceman tested positive right when we got there, and I had ridden in a car with him, so I got quarantined then too. So I missed 2 weeks of that camp. There's a long story to that. I didn't miss that. I missed 7 days of that. And then I was worried, so I started skiing a bunch, like too much, and then hurt my back in a crash. So then I didn't train the rest of the camp. So I kicked out of the first start in Val d'Isère, France, with almost no days of practice. I think I had 3 days of Super G training and 4 days of downhill training when I kicked out of the first World Cup, which is borderline dangerous, but it was my own decision. I mean, no one was stopping me from racing at that point, But COVID proved really difficult. I seemed to get kind of the brunt of that. So I kicked out of the gate 2020 really unprepared. And I also had stress fractures in my L4 vertebrae. So I was really hurting with my back. So I was skiing in these ridiculous back braces. So I was trying to ski through a bunch of pain, which looking back on proved very, very poor decision, I would say.
So microfractures and the herniated disc?
Yeah, the microfractures were what was causing the pain. I mean, a lot of people have herniated discs that they don't feel it. So, but it turned out it was just like the microfractures in the L4 were causing this like deep ache that I was really struggling with. And then that led us, Val d'Isère was the first race before Val Gardena when I got truly hurt.
And I just watched that video.
Oh, you did? Nice.
I did.
Good for you.
I did. I wanted to be in your mind as much as I could be before talking to you in person. And I watched that video twice. And I just want to know what was going through your mind. You were almost done.
Yep.
Right? You were at the bottom of the hill.
Yeah, so it was kind of the last big turn. So it was a downhill training run. So before World Cup downhill races, you get 2 training runs down the hill. I'd already been told that I wasn't racing the downhill, so I was kind of just doing it for practice for the Super G. And I think prior to that crash, I had a mistake, so I knew I was going slow. Like I knew my time wasn't great, so I kind of backed off the gas pedal. And in adrenaline sports, that can be the ultimate demise because you kind of like zoom out of your focus, if that makes sense. Like usually you have, extreme tunnel vision. You're not really thinking about what's going on. And I remember like zooming out, kind of going into that section. That section's really challenging. It's called the chaw slots. And there's a bunch of jumps that they're like these double jumps that you have to gap and then land and then absorb. They're like these three rollers in a row, and you jump them, gap it, land, and then have to absorb one. And it was the last one. It was the very last roll, and I just hit a patch of ice, and I wasn't focused enough to kind of save it. And then I ended up actually straddling the gate. It's a pretty slow section of the course. I was probably going like 60. But I just remember, not being overly focused, and then doing that, and then kind of zooming back into focus and being like, oh shit, like here we go. I got to save this. But the left leg broke pretty much immediately and stopped all hope for saving it.
Before I ask another question, I'm going to stop this. We have less than a minute, and I'll see you in about 5 seconds.
Sounds good.
Bye. Okay. So the first leg broke in what would eventually be 3 places on the tibia, 2 places on the fibula. Did you know immediately?
Yeah, that one, it was really loud.
Wow.
The analogy I use is it sounded like if you're camping and you have a really long stick and you go and like hit it against a tree to break it to make firewood, it like sounded like that cracking. And I knew immediately because I folded on top of it. I felt it break, heard it break, but there was no pain right away, right? Like I wasn't like screaming already, but I rolled onto my back and it looked like cooked spaghetti. You could see it in the video, right? So I knew the left leg broke immediately. And at that point I kind of gave up. Sometimes you can like save it ish, like if you're kind of rolling that direction, but I kind of just tried to like tuck and roll at that point, knowing that wasn't gonna hold up against much pressure. But then I was obviously not hoping to break the right leg too, but rolled over a few times, and then the ski didn't come off and it started to spin. And I felt that one. I didn't hear that one, but that one I felt pretty good. It happened pretty late in the crash. I think it was like roll 3, or when I roll over myself the second or third time, you see it kind of spin in the video when I'm on my back. And then I hit the fence and kind of like came to rest, and immediately to rip my gloves off. You can kind of see in the video, I was like, I got like crazy hot and started sweating. And I was like, oh yeah, definitely broke my legs. And then I sat up to look at them, and my right leg was, the ski boot was like completely backwards. So like my toe box was in the snow with my knee going up, right? So my foot was completely backwards. And my left one was like just to my side. I could touch with the toes of my foot with my knee going straight down. And then an Italian man named Antonio came up and started. He was the first one there. He's a Carbonari, which is like basically like a military of Italy. And he started crying and he started petting my head, and the tears were hitting my forehead. He was like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It was quite the experience. But luckily shock is an amazing thing. And I didn't have much pain until they started to move me around. But it was definitely quite the experience to feel your body break that way.
I mean, you looked like a tumbleweed.
Yeah. It's
rolling,
gross, right?
and then when you hit the fence, that was just insult to injury.
Yeah, I mean, that didn't really hurt. It was just kind of funky. You could see the legs, like when I hit the fence, you see it like flopping around, and definitely pretty gross. But the fence didn't really hurt, luckily. I mean, I'd rather hit a fence than a tree, right? And that's what it's there for. So, but yeah.
So what were the next few hours like?
A few of my coaches came down. Some of them didn't really have the stomach for it, so they stayed a little ways away. Coach Ben Black was standing there the whole time talking to me and make some jokes. It was nice to like see familiar faces. Antonio quit crying, which was good. And I obviously asked for pain medication. From my best understanding, I didn't get any for a while. They put me in a tarp they put me in a tarp because my legs were going in such different directions to like kind of straighten them out. And they picked me up to put me into the helicopter. And the helicopter was like, they just lower a lady down with a basket. So they inched me onto a tarp, and then they picked the tarp up, and I remember my legs sliding into place. Like, so it was like up on the wall of the tarp, and it just kind of like slid down and dropped a loud F-bomb and and passed out from pain for a few minutes. When I woke up, I was like halfway up in the helicopter. And the lady said that we were going to land just off the hill because there were still more racers to come. So they just pulled me right off to the side of the hill, and we landed, and she opened me back up, and she's like, I'm going to give you something for the pain medication, or for pain, and because we have to reset your legs. And then my PT was there. I don't really remember this part, but then they gave me, I think, enough ketamine to kill a horse. And then I woke up butt naked with my ski boots on in a CAT scan. They were very worried about my spine. So that was my first come to moment as I sat up in a CAT scan, like freaking out. Don't really remember much after that. And then my surgery was over 9 hours. And I woke up once on the surgery table because I was throwing up, and I had like the oxygen thing, and I threw up on the operating table. And I remember a bunch of people like hitting me with towels and like, and yeah, that was a pretty grim moment. And then I just came to it in the hospital bed next to a guy named Fabrizio in the Bolzano hospital.
So you said that you had used Google Translate to make sure that you knew what was going on.
Well, so originally I had a doctor, an American surgeon there with me. He was great. He stayed up all night. He watched the surgery from a room. They wouldn't let him in the surgical room because of COVID. But he was by my side when I came out. I think I woke up at 4 a.m. or something, and he was standing there waiting for me. His first thoughts, he was like, left leg was mangled, but they did an amazing job with it. Your left leg looks great. The right leg, due to how long the left leg took, it was an easy-ish fix, but they didn't have enough time to fix it right. So they put in like temporary plates. And he's like, that one, you're probably going to have to redo. Then he had to leave because the race was happening that morning. So he drove back up to the hill in case someone else got hurt. And then no one in the hospital spoke English. I never saw my surgeon again. The surgeon that did it happened to just be at the race, wasn't a surgeon in that hospital, but he was an Italian surgeon. Never saw him again. And this old guy came in and was checking on me and just like checking, where all the stitches were and stuff. But yeah, I had to use Google Translate to kind of know what was going on and like trying to figure out how to get out of the hospital. And I think I'm usually a pretty level-headed guy, but I was losing it there by the end of that hospital stay. And I think I put my mom through the ringer by yelling at her on the phone to get me home. I feel bad about it to this day, but I had a pretty hard time with that. Like, not being able to communicate with anyone, not knowing when I could leave. I had to take a medevac flight home. It was Christmas, so no one was doing medevac flights. It was just all this crap that kept adding up, and I kind of snapped. So I hope I live the rest of my life without breaking down like that. But it was pretty tough on me there for a few days.
So 6 days in that hospital, yes?
Yeah, I think I left the 7th day. Yeah.
Were you alone? What was who was around you?
Yeah, so no one could see me. My ski coach snuck in just real quick to say hi. But yeah, no one could see me because of COVID. Had a roommate. He was awesome. Broke his kneecap in a motorcycle accident, but we got along with Google Translate, had some fun. But yeah, I was pretty much just sitting there. I think I had my computer and phone, and 7 days of kind of lying there hitting the morphine button, but yeah, it was pretty miserable. And just like I felt good enough to like get home, but they wouldn't let me get on a commercial flight. So we were talking to this international, basically medevac flights, and they were like, oh, the earliest we can get you home is like January 1st. And it was like December, what was it? Was it right after Christmas? It was right before Christmas. I heard the 19th, flew home. I guess I got home Christmas Eve, 23rd or 24th. Yeah. And they're like, yeah, we can't get you home till like, well after Christmas. And I didn't like that answer very much. And so that's when I called my mom and kind of freaked out. And then they're like, all right, we got one. You're going to like kind of jump around. So I had one company take me. So sorry, a long ramble, but an ambulance picked me up in Bolzano, drove me to Innsbruck, got in a plane from Innsbruck to Iceland, Reykjavik, Iceland. Canadian plane landed. They took me out of the plane, set me on the tarmac. I was strapped to a backboard. The plane drove away, said bye. Another plane pulled up, opened the door, and goes, "Oh, are you Sam?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm flying on a runway, strapped to a board." And they hop out, throw me in the thing, and off we go. Then we landed in like the northern territory of Canada, and then Edmonton, and then Salt Lake, and then an ambulance home. So it was like a 4 or 5 company transaction with one patient. So it's kind of a logistical nightmare for everybody, but it was pretty nice to get home. And I owe a lot to the ski team docs to making that happen. That's for sure.
21 hours?
Yeah, it was a long one. I think that sounds about right.
What were you, once you did get home, who were you talking to? Were you thinking that this was going to be the end of your career?
Yeah, so the Italian doc, the American surgeon that was there said that like, oh no, you'll race again. The Italian doc was like, oh yeah, no chance. So you'll never race again. So I was pretty ready for it to be over. And like in a weird way, like when I was lying in the snow there, it was kind of a relief. Like it was like, oh, this is my way out. Like, I wasn't not good enough to make the Olympics. It wasn't, it was just like I got injured and I couldn't do it. It was like, oh, poor me. But it was like this weird sense of relief. And then I got back and just hanging with the family. Obviously, everyone was just glad that I'm still me, didn't hit my head or spine or like it could always be worse. And I was kind of like coming to terms with like being done. And then I went in to get my right leg revised. With a surgeon in Utah. He was a really good trauma surgeon. He actually had seen my case before I even got in there, just like to look at the right leg and how it could be fixed. And he did a great job. And when I came out of surgery, he's like, "Oh, you're going to be totally fine. Like you can definitely race again." And I was like, "Oh, damn it." No, not actually, but I mean, it was kind of a relief, but it's also like, this is going to be a long road back. But just hearing those like kind of lit the fire. And it was like, I had a great lifting coach, a guy named Chris Miller, and he works for the Brooklyn Nets now. And another guy named Callan who ended up working for the Magic. And then our PTs were so patient with me. And like, I was so not motivated at first, kind of just going through the motions. But they just kept being like, they were so patient and so supportive. And then it just stoked the fire to eventually get to where it was like, all right, I'm doing this thing. And it was the perfect recipe. Like I wouldn't have kept going if those people weren't around, and I owe them everything. And they've helped me like almost be proud of my story and like to come back, like no matter how well I do, just to like know that, 2 broken legs doesn't stop life. There's people that have had way worse that, live, do epic things in life. And like, that's all the motivation you need, is that, injuries don't stop anything, even if it stops your sport, it doesn't stop anything else.
Prior to that injury, what was the worst that you had? Was it that knee?
I actually broke my arm and my hand at the same time on both sides. So I broke my left hand and my right arm on 3 days apart. So I had the double arm cast, which proved extremely difficult to certain aspects of life. So I just took a steak knife and cut off my hand cast because I wasn't comfortable enough to ask for help for certain aspects. I'm sure you can, use imaginations of challenging things with 2 casts. That one was pretty bad. I crashed in Canada when I fractured my back, and I partially punctured a lung, so I was like coughing up blood. That was a good one. A couple of separated shoulders. Hands are usually the most common thing in ski racing, like broken hands. Did that a few times, broken thumbs. But yeah, definitely. Probably the worst, yeah, was the knee, but that wasn't even that bad. I was like fine in a few weeks. So I really, after all that, like really came away unscathed in my career until this injury.
So I talked to a fair amount of athletes who rehabbed from injury, and along with that physical rehabilitation, they also have a mental struggle that is kind of simultaneous. Did you have that with the legs, or were you kind of so used to rehab that didn't impact as much?
Do you mean when I got back to racing, or just in general, like right away, like struggle with certain mental health aspects?
Yeah, in general, during the course of the beginning of the rehab process.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
guess,
because honestly, I don't talk to athletes frequently that have as interesting an injury history as you have. So I'm
yeah.
wondering how that mental process fluctuated throughout your injury history.
Yeah, so it changed a lot for me. So at first it was almost easy because it was like in terms of rehab, it was just like, oh, I just want to like be able to play sports again. Like I just want to be able to play basketball and go golfing. And like that's where I initially started. That's where I was at. My skiing wasn't even in my head. And that was a blessing in disguise in the sense of just like I was calm about it. There wasn't any urgency to get back. And then as the seed started to get planted in my head about racing again, I started really working with a psychologist because I knew that I was going to have some demons in there about, if you hear your legs break or see them do what they do, it's really hard to trust your body again. Especially in like a sport like mine, it's like you're using your body to fight, the mountain. And if your body can't hold up against it, then it's not a good thing, and you lose a lot of confidence. So I worked with this great sports psych, and her name's Ricky. She was super patient with me again, and we kind of just worked through everything. She helped me get to where I could watch the crash comfortably, talk about the crash comfortably, and I was more focused on that than I was like timeline. I was so settled in for it to be a long recovery. I think one thing with ACLs and stuff is it's like, oh, it's 6 to 9 months, but it's like, so it's enough to maybe like get back for next season, or you have this like weird urgency. Whereas I was like, I'm coming back from 2 broken legs. It's going to take me forever. So I just kind of like settled in. So I really, really didn't struggle with that aspect. And another thing that really helped me, and this is a horrible thing to say, but my girlfriend, Alice Merriweather, she was struggling with an eating disorder at the time. So a lot of my energy went towards being there for her and being with her. And that really helped me in my own recovery. And I think it helped her in her recovery. And then she ended up actually breaking her leg when she got back on snow. So we got to rehab broken legs together, which is not very heartwarming, but it was really great to have somebody to do it with, and it was like, there's no pity in that. Like you don't get any pity. So you kind of just made it easier to just, I guess, put the pants on in the morning and go to work at rehab because you're both doing it. So it's kind of an interesting story that ended up that way, but it really helped me with the mental side. So I would say sorry.
I said rehab dates.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say my mental struggle came when it came to skiing again. That's when I really struggled mentally. It was like I've hung my hat on the ability to kind of send it in difficult situations and be an aggressive skier, and that's paid well in its time. But I worry that I don't have that in my head, and I still don't have any proof that I have that. And that's something I'm still working through.
At the end of the 20 months of rehab, were you prepared? Because you are less than a month into this post-rehab experience, right? August 28th-ish, back on snow.
Oh, are you saying when I raced?
Yeah. So after the rehab
Yeah.
process had concluded,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of mental state were you in at that point where like the end of the tunnel is right here, right in front of you?
Yeah, so it kind of turns into like a ladder, right? Or like a staircase, and like you just kind of yeah, each one's a like a stepping stone. Some are bigger than others, and a big one for me. So I skied last winter, but I skied very lightly. Like, I mean, the analogy would be like if a football player just like got on the field and like threw some passes. Like I kind of just slid around, made some marks, did some training, but like really light training, on easy snow, easy conditions, and my body held up great. I went to Mammoth in May, and that camp went really well. Um, but I'm still like doing rehab every day because I still have a lot of little muscles in my legs that don't do much that we're trying to like get working again. A lot of the big muscles are back to normal strength, but a lot of little stuff like stabilizers and whatnot aren't quite ready. And my power numbers, so like my ability to jump is really down still. My strength is high, so I'm safe to ski, but like in terms of like power output, I'm below where I was when I crashed. So we're still working on stuff. Like I'm still, I would say, in the rehab process because I'm trying to get back to being better than I was. So that I don't think that really ever ends. I don't know if it ends for anyone that has, an injury. You always, even if you do an ACL, you still have soreness, and you're still, you ice your knee and you maybe do a little less reps, just like save it a little bit. But I wasn't ready for Mammoth, but it went so well. Like I showed up and I started skiing and I was immediately pretty fast. And that was like such a relief because I worked really hard with Ricky and sports psych to be mentally prepared, but like there's still a lot of unknowns. And everything kind of fell into place in Mammoth, and like the unknowns were fine, if that makes sense. Like I guess I was prepared. I didn't think I was prepared, but I was, if that makes sense. Based off a lot of the work that I did with Ricky prior. Granted, those conditions are also pretty easy and not very scary, if that makes sense. Because it's in the spring, so you're just kind of like working on your technique and not really like pushing the limits. And then I went to New Zealand, and the camp was awesome, and I skied, every day, and struggled through some pain just from chronic pain of having metal in your legs and whatnot. And but I found that I wasn't as mentally strong as I wanted to be. I still had too much, I guess, fluctuation of good days and bad days, and being fast and not being very fast. And I found days when it was dark, I really didn't have the guts to ski hard when I couldn't see much, and so that's something I'm starting to work on now. I found, I wrote down all of these weaknesses that I felt, that I need to work on, because if you're going to be, the best of your sport, these are things that you can't have, I guess, dents in your armor from that. You have to figure them out. So got a long ways to go still, I guess is the short answer.
What is at the top of your mind right now, moving toward back to where you were?
Well, somewhere in that crash, this is kind of not the answer you're looking for, but the top of my mind, in that crash, I have a tear in my patella tendon. So I am figuring, I just had all my meetings with doctors yesterday, and we're going to go non-surgical approach, because if I had surgery again, my career would be over. So we're going to try and load it up with injections, because it just swells up a lot. And it was just something that slid through the cracks in all the other injuries, that has come to light as I've been able to push it harder. It's been like, I've been like, oh, my knee hurts now, and it just kind of came up, and it's super unfortunate. I'm really glad that there's a non-surgical approach, because after all this, I really didn't want it to be over. But I need the knee to feel better, because it's right now where I'm losing my most confidence. And then if I fix that, I would say, to answer your true question, I want as much repetition as possible of doing, just because that's how I get comfortable. And, doing it every time I do something since I got hurt, even like the first time I jumped, I've been like, oh, I can't jump. Like, you kidding me? It's only been, 8 months since I broke both my legs. There's no way I can jump. And then you jump and you're like, oh, that was totally fine. And then you're just on your way, so I need more moments like that doing my sport, where, even if I get out of balance and almost crash and save it, then it's like, oh, I can save it. Like, I'm totally fine. Let's keep going, So I want repetition most important thing for me is repetition in my sport and learning to trust myself again, that like, that my body's not just going to break on me again. And if it does, it's not actually a horrible thing. It sucks, but it's not the end of the world.
What has shifted in your pre-performance routine since you got injured?
Well, my first race back, I was a nervous wreck. And that was new for me. I'm usually not overly nervous. But I would say one thing that I enjoy nerves. I think nerves are a really good thing. So I'm just going to try and turn those nerves into the adrenaline and use the nerves towards, taking more risk in my ski racing. But in terms of pre-race or pre-performance, physically, I have to physically warm up a lot. I got a lot of creaky joints now. So that's changed a lot for me, and making time for that is important. I got to wake up earlier. I got to get to the hill earlier. I got to do more free ski runs. I got to make sure everything's warmed up and ready to go. But mentally, I think I have a lot of work to do. I think that's kind of the top of my mind, is I got to figure out how to get into the right headspace. And if the old headspace is the right headspace, it might not be. I might need to rebuild that from the ground up, which I'm looking forward to coming up. We're going to Colorado for a month-long camp, so that'll be definitely top of the mind during that block.
Is there anything else that you think that I missed about your story?
No, I'd say you got me talking a lot more than I thought I would, but no, I don't think so.
Before we go, I ask every episode of season 2 to give me a song that either inspires them, that they listen to before every competition, that has gotten them through some kind of mental struggle. What would you like to add to the playlist? I have had a weird combination of songs so far, so nothing is too crazy. And while you think about that, I will figure out what day this episode comes out on.
Okay. Man. I mean, there's a lot of songs. I can't really give you my, me and my girlfriend song. That's a little weird. Trying to think of what song I listen to the most. I listen to a lot of songs. It's got to be country, though. I don't know if you like country.
I do like country.
Okay.
Huge fan.
I would say Stone by Whiskey Myers.
Ooh. I think
do you know it?
I think you are the first country addition to this playlist.
Nice.
Okay, so your episode will come out on October 12th. So you have a solid few weeks. The other thing I ask is that you send me a picture that I can use for social media.
Okay.
And then I will talk to you once this is published. I hope you love it. Thank you for sharing your story with me.
No, I appreciate it. And thanks for letting me share it. And thanks for doing the podcast. It's cool that, I don't know, I've listened to a few of your episodes, so I'll listen to some more. Yeah.
Is there anything else before we conclude that you would like to talk about? The floor is yours.
What's your background? Like where, like tell me about yourself. I just talked about myself for 2 hours.
It was only an hour and 8 minutes-ish.
All right.
So my background is in broadcast journalism and sports psychology.
Cool.
So I have two degrees, and from West Virginia University. There's
cool
cap right there.
Nice.
And when I was in college, everyone would look at my majors and go, well, what do you want to do with those two? Like, they're so different. And I was thinking, I just want to tell stories. I want to talk to people like you who have gone through insane mental struggles and physical struggles and just give them a platform. And I think that the work that Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan and Simone Biles have done have really paved the way in a way that I honestly didn't expect. Because now I feel like all the eyes are on this kind of mental health dialogue. And when I started this podcast, it was the beginning of 2020. We were in the throes of COVID. And I thought there's never going to be another time where all of these elite athletes are going through the exact same thing. They're all sitting at home. They're all mourning the loss of their sport for who knows how long. Let's just start reaching out to them and see if they want to talk about their mental health. And to this day, I mean, we're almost 100 episodes in, and I'm at almost a 100% success rate. It's incredible. And the stories I've gotten to tell are from all over the country, all over the world. There are so many different sports that have been recognized. I mean, everything from traditional football and men's basketball, women's basketball and baseball, to bull riding and race car drivers and skiers and snowboarders. An upcoming episode is a bobsled captain. I've had just incredible perspectives, and
that's awesome.
It's so fun to just sit and talk to them about their sport. Like, obviously we talked about your sport, but I like that this kind of platform gives us a space to talk outside of your sport, because like you were saying, you are not just an athlete. But when you have mental struggles that are related to your performance, you also go through mental struggles as a human. And so I think that highlighting that part of it is a huge pillar of what I do.
Yeah, I like that. That's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like, I look back at the people and the stories that I've told, and I want to do this for the rest of my life. Like, I'm 25 and I love this. I love it every day.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, if you ever need more people to talk to, one of my mate girlfriend's been through a hell of a run, so
Yeah.
just hit Jimmy or I up. We'll find you a fun story if you're looking.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that. If you can just funnel stories to me, that would be fantastic.
Okay, I'll keep it in mind. If I run into any good stories, I'll send them your way.
But it's interesting though, because like not everyone that I talk to has been through some kind of insane trauma-inducing injury or struggle. Like, some of them are fairly demure, and I say that not in a bad way. Like, one story is more valid than the other because of trauma, but in the way that they handle it, it's everyone handles things so differently. And so I could have the same athlete, the same age, the same sport, everything on paper is the same, and they could handle an ACL completely differently. And so in that way, I don't think I'll ever run out of stories, and that's really exciting because everyone handles everything differently.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's never going to be repetitive.
Yeah.
Well,
all
cool.
right. Well, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out with me, and I will get back in touch once this is published. If there's anything between now and then that you would like me to add, just DM me and I'll add it to the script.
All right, sounds good.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, good luck.
Bye.
Good luck with your career, and
Thank you. Good luck with your rehab.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
All right. Talk